Have you guys ever thought back to how different the world is, or kind of pondered the idea of how different the world is than you thought it would be when you were a kid? Like, think back to like when you were a kid and you were looking forward and just imagining what the world was going to be like, and just how different it is now than those imaginations. Comedian John Mulaney has kind of a famous bit where he jokes. He says, "You know what I thought was going to be a much bigger problem than it actually is? Quicksand." He's like, in all the cartoons, quicksand is a real issue. Like, I thought I was going to have to prepare for what I was going to do if I got caught in it. But now, like, not only do we not ever see quicksand, like, I've never even heard about it. Like, no one's ever given me directions to their house and told me to take an alternate route because there's a little bit of quicksand on the way. And as I was listening to that, it kind of got me thinking about all of the similar misconceptions that I had as a kid. Like piranhas. I thought that piranhas were going to be a problem, right? Like, dip your toe into the water and just these flesh-eating swarm of piranhas was going to like clean the meat from the bone. Or another one is like stop, drop, and roll. I figured with how many times we practiced and rehearsed that, all of us would have had to at least once by now stop, drop, and roll, but I don't think I ever have. But the big one for me, this is the one that like I just really thought that all of us were going to have to strategize carefully how we were going to avoid and how we were going to deal with this, was cannibals. Like, maybe I just read Robinson Crusoe too young. I'm not sure. I don't know. But like, cannibals are less of a threat than I expected them to be. As a kid, they seemed like a real problem. I was kind of reminded of that childhood angst earlier this week when Lewis, our 3-year-old, came up to me and he was very concerned. And he said, "Dad, cannibalism is sinning." And I said, "Yes, that is a true statement." And he said, "Mom has a baby in her belly. Has she been doing cannibalism?" Said she has not been doing cannibalism. He said, "I can't figure out how it got there if she didn't eat it." The world is just a crazy place to be when you're a kid, is it not? But in other ways, it's also a lot simpler. Like, things just seem more black and white. Heroes look like heroes. Villains look like villains. Lewis also loves to come up to me at random times, and he just says, "I'm watching you, bad guy." He wants me to respond with something like, "You won't stop me this time, good guy." And then he's like, "You want to battle?" And there's just like no ambiguity, right? The characters' names are good guy and bad guy, and they just kind of cordially invite each other to battle on occasion. I thought that the dilemmas that we would face and the choices that we would have to make would look a lot more like that. Like, we'd be deciding between like helping a stranger or robbing a bank, right? Like, that's what all the kids shows kind of depicted for me, was very easy decision here. Are you going to help this old lady across the street, or are you going to blow something up with dynamite? But the decisions and the choices that we make aren't often between two so clearly different things, are they? And that can make things tricky. What are you going to do with your tax return money? You're going to spend it on a family trip to make memories? That's a good thing to do. Are you going to save it responsibly? Oh, well, that's a good thing to do too. Are you going to give it generously? What am I supposed to do now? That's also a really good thing to do. It'd be easy if the question was like, what should you do with your tax return money? Should you save the puppy shelter or buy crates of TNT? Like, easy choice. It's less straightforward when you're dealing things like wanting to teach your kids gentleness and also teach your kids discipline. It's less straightforward when you want to be honest and transparent, but you don't want to unnecessarily hurt people's feelings. When work is a good thing and rest is a good thing, somehow at the same time. When helping others is a good thing and asking for help is a good thing. When patience is a good thing and taking initiative is a good thing. And maybe we can be left kind of feeling exasperated and say, how's anybody supposed to know what to do? Seems like an impossible choice. Maybe you even feel like an acute anxiety from that kind of thing. Maybe you loathe decision-making for that very reason. Because any decision for any one thing feels like a neglect of other good stuff. Well, I have good news for you. The scriptures aren't silent on the matter. They're filled with biblical wisdom to navigate challenging dilemmas like that. And they are clear on this, that even among a sea of good things, there is one thing that is necessary. Even when presented with a plethora of good choices, there can still be a right choice. There can still be a better portion. Today's text isn't going to make all of your choices simple from here on out. But my aim is that today's text will fix your eyes on the one who is our better portion. That it'll whet your appetite for the one thing that is necessary. And with that clarity on the one necessary thing and that hunger for the one better portion, that you will be better equipped to navigate those challenging dilemmas. Picking up in verse 38, we see that Jesus and his disciples are again traveling. This is why the series that we're going through right now is titled On the Road to Jerusalem, because these chapters are all structured around Jesus making his way from Galilee ultimately to Jerusalem. They happen on the road. Luke tells us that this took place while they were traveling. It happened at some point along the journey. And it's good for us to remember Luke arranges his material logically, not always chronologically. I feel like I have said that almost every time that I've preached in this series. John is going to tell us more details about this family that Jesus comes to their house, about Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. He's going to tell us more about their hometown of Bethany. But Bethany is a town that's just outside of Jerusalem, which means this event that took place almost certainly happened later in the sequence than Luke gives it to us. So why did Luke put it here? What is it that he wants us to see? I want us to kind of put a pin in that question and just keep it in the back of our minds as we go. Why did Luke include this here? We're introduced to two sisters, to Martha and to Mary. Martha welcomed Jesus into her home, and she had a sister named Mary. And Mary is described as one who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he said. This verb that's used here describes an active, ongoing listening, a participatory kind of taking place in the dialogue that's happening, listening, hanging on every word that comes out of Jesus's mouth. Mary's exemplifying what a disciple should be and do. And so Luke very specifically uses the language of sitting at the Lord's feet. Because at the teacher's feet is a disciple's rightful place. Paul uses the same expression in Acts 22 as shorthand for discipleship. He kind of stands in front of a mob in Jerusalem and he starts giving them his credentials, that he's a Jewish man, that he was born in Tarsus, but he was raised in Jerusalem. And then he adds, educated at the feet of Gamaliel. In other words, he's saying, he was my rabbi and I was his disciple. I was educated at his feet. It was typical for Jewish boys of the day to attend some level of school to begin learning the Torah. Most of them then went back to their fathers to learn the family trade. But the best and the brightest would be invited to continue their studies and to apprentice with a particular rabbi, to sit at his feet, It was an exclusive group that would sit at a rabbi's feet, an honor that not many could boast in, hence why kind of Paul gives it there in Acts as among his list of credentials. Unlike Paul, the disciples, the 12, they're here with Jesus, would have predominantly been those boys that were sent back to learning trades, like fishing. They didn't get the invite to come follow the rabbi. They were not the ones that got picked for those coveted spots, which is one of the reasons that it's remarkable that this teacher named Jesus came along and extended the invitation that he did, that came and said, "Come, follow me." What's even more remarkable is that it's not just the Peters and the Andrews and the James and the Johns that Jesus gives that invitation to, but it's also the Marys and the Marthas, who would have never received an invite to sit at the feet of the rabbi, who never would have had an opportunity to learn the law and hang on every word of the scriptures as the teacher unfolds them. But Jesus has invited Mary, and she is not going to miss the chance to sit at the feet of the rabbi and hear the law taught and unfolded. And then we also have Martha. Martha's name means mistress. If you were to kind of talk about the Lord and the lady of the house, the name Martha would be that Aramaic word for the lady of the house. And she certainly seems to live up to the title as the hostess of the home. It's clear from Luke's structure that we're supposed to compare and contrast these two sisters. He begins with Martha. He mentions that she has a sister, Mary, and then he follows with, "But Martha." So let's do that. Let's kind of hold them side by side and compare their responses here. Mary sits at the feet of Jesus as a disciple, hanging on his every word. But Martha rejects Jesus and doesn't follow as one of the disciples because she's worldly and violent and greedy and chooses instead to follow a guerrilla band of zealots who are attempting to overthrow Rome in a bloody uprising. No, that's not at all what it says, is it? That would be simple. That would be easy. That would be black and white. You got Mary good, Martha bad, case closed. No, in reality, Martha is also a disciple of Jesus, one who also wants to sit at the feet of Jesus and receive the Lord's teaching and follow the Lord's words. Look again how Mary is described. Martha had a sister named Mary who also sat at the Lord's feet. The only other person who's been mentioned here other than Jesus is Martha. So who is the also referring to, if not Martha? Luke doesn't say Mary was a disciple of Jesus, but Martha wasn't. Luke says Mary and Martha sat listening at the feet of Jesus, but Martha was distracted. I'd like you to kind of stop and ask yourself, are you distracted? You might be tempted to say, like, well, I'm here, aren't I? It's a lot better than you can say for most people. If you haven't yet followed Jesus in faith and baptism, maybe you find yourself still kind of wanting to respond like, so what if it isn't my top priority? So what if I've got a lot of other things going on? I'm trying at least. I'm here at least. I'm trying to be closer to God. So what if I have a few distractions? If you do profess faith in Christ, you might be catching yourself feeling something even similar. Saying, of course I'm distracted. Who isn't? That's just life. But I'm a Christian. I'm a disciple. I try to listen to what Jesus says. I believe the Bible. Try to obey it. Yeah, maybe I don't have time to just kind of sit and read it and pray. But I do what I can. I just have to multitask. I listen to it when I'm driving. I say a quick prayer on the way out the door. What difference does it make? Luke sets up a contrast here, suggesting that it does in fact make a difference. On one hand, he gives us sitting and listening to Jesus, and on the other hand, he gives us sitting and listening to Jesus, but distracted. Distracted by what? By money, By fame? By greed? No. By much serving. Again, maybe you think like, I'm not really sure what the problem is. It sounds like Martha's doing pretty darn good to me. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus and trying to listen and just distracted by a lot of serving because there's a lot of tasks to get done. We are a task-oriented people. We put a high priority on productivity. Being distracted by many tasks is not a problem to us. It's a virtue. People come to us all the time and they ask us, they say, hey, how have you been? What's your answer? 9 times out of 10. Good, busy, right? Either good, busy, or busy, good. Like those are our 2 options. Busy, yeah. Whew. Busy. Oh, so busy. And we pride ourselves on our busyness. There's a pretty well-known missionary story about a missionary who was sharing the gospel with a new people group that he was working with. And when he finished and the people were kind of asking questions and talking among themselves, it became quickly evident that they understood Judas Iscariot to be the hero of the story. And at first he was like, what on earth did I do wrong when I was telling the story? What he found out was that in their culture, it was considered a virtue if you could lie or cheat or swindle and come out with an advantage. Then that was a good thing. If you could make yourself richer, you did a good work. So they heard the gospel story and they assumed Jesus died, he must be the loser. Judas the betrayer came out with 30 pieces of silver, he must be the hero. If we were willing to be honest about our own cultural blind spots, this is one of the passages that we would be prone to diametrically reverse. To feel ashamed at the idea of being Mary, who had nothing better to do and all the time on the world on her hands to sit around and just listen to Jesus. And we'd be proud to share in Martha's badge of honor because she's busy with many things and doing her best. Which do you want to be? Have all the time to listen to Jesus or be really, really busy, distracted with many things, but trying your best? We lament it. We say, like, in an ideal world, I wouldn't be so busy. But if we're honest, we secretly pride ourselves on the number of distractions we can juggle. Even if you don't yet believe me about that, you at least sympathize with Martha in this story. Think about her situation. Think about how stressed you would be about all the details if Jesus was coming to your house for dinner. How about it even if it wasn't Jesus? Like, what if it was just the King of England? How would you feel about making sure all your ducks were in a row as he came to dinner? Or let's keep kind of going down the list. What if it was just your favorite celebrity that was showing up for dinner? Would you be cool as a cucumber? Or would you be a basket case? What if it wasn't even a celebrity? What if it was just your new boss? Or a neighbor who hadn't come over before? Or your mother-in-law? How prone would you be to being distracted by all the details that you need to make sure are in order because someone's coming over for dinner? If you're welcoming a dignitary or someone noteworthy, you would have lots of things on your mind. Add to that the fact that we noted a couple weeks ago when Jesus sent out the 72, that Jesus always traveled with the 12 and usually with a much larger crowd of disciples than that. It was from that crowd that he sent 72 of them out. How stressed would you be, even if no notable dignitaries were included, if 80 to 100 people were coming to your house for dinner? I would imagine that the answer would be something along the lines of, like, if 80 to 100 people are coming to my house for dinner, I would not be distracted. I would be consumed. I would be dead. I would have nothing else to think about. That's where Martha is. And guess who isn't helping? Mary. How dare she? Who does she think she is? With all these things that there are to be done. Haven't you felt that way? Isn't it a struggle when you're doing a lot and you feel like you aren't getting any help? It feels wrong or unfair. When you're doing the dishes and you glance to the other room and your housemate or your spouse is sitting on the couch and they're looking at their phone. And even though you sat on the couch and looked at your phone many times before and maybe about like 15 minutes ago, now that they're doing that while you're doing this, it's pretty much a capital offense now. It's like, the only thing worse is they can like put up their feet and take a nap. That would be like murder in the first degree. If you don't know what I'm talking about or you've never felt that way, you're lying. Martha feels indignant and she goes to Jesus for justice. Surely Jesus will be on my side. Obviously, he's going to see how unfair this is, how much I'm doing, how much Mary is slacking. And so she comes and she says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to give me a hand. This is probably the cry for justice that rings out most frequently in our house more than anything else. Dad, don't you care that I'm the only one cleaning up? Tell Gilbert that he has to help. The easy thing to do is to just say, yeah, Gilbert, help. Right? Mary, go help your sister. Lend a hand. Or maybe we'd want to pivot and we'd want to be like, why does it have to be Mary and Martha serving? Why can't Peter and John get up and go help? How about the brother Lazarus? Doesn't he have 2 hands? Can't he get into the kitchen and start making sandwiches? But just like Martha, we would miss the point. Again, we just take it for granted that the most important thing is that all the tasks need to be done. And now the question is, what's a fair way to divide up the labor? That's just assumed for us. Jesus is on a completely different page. The Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has made the right choice, and it will not be taken away from her. Notice that Jesus doesn't rebuke Martha for serving. Problem isn't that serving others is a bad thing. He says, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things. Maybe you think, I mean, yeah, there's lots of things that need to get done. It's all well and good to say not to worry about them, just to prioritize sitting and hearing the Lord's words. But it won't change the reality that someone needs to feed these people. I'm not sure that's true. I seem to remember a time when the disciples were concerned that Jesus hadn't considered the logistical realities of feeding a large group of people. And Jesus seemed to manage to take care of those 5,000 plus concerns pretty sufficiently. Where we would say, like, okay, first things first, figure out a plan of attack, divvy up these tasks, get these people fed. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Jesus replies that one thing is necessary, and that Mary has chosen the better portion. If you can't hear it, there are rich biblical echoes in those words. That reply is singing in harmony with the Psalms. Psalm 27:4, David writes, I have asked one thing from the Lord. One thing I desire, to dwell in the house of the Lord all my days, all the days of my life, gazing on the beauty of the Lord and seeking him in his temple. There's one thing that's necessary, one thing worth desiring. If you could only ask for one thing, there's only one thing worth asking. It's to be in the presence of the Lord. Why? Because Psalm 16:5, David sings, for those who take another god for themselves, their sorrows will multiply. But I will not. I will not speak their names or pour out their offerings. No, instead, the Lord is my chosen portion. He is my cup of blessing. He holds my future. In him, I have a beautiful inheritance. The better portion is not a something. It's a someone. The one thing that's necessary is to know and be with him. The better portion is him. This helps kind of answer our lingering question. Why did Luke include this story here? It's in case you were to think that life in the kingdom is earned by meritorious acts of service. Maybe you just read the parable of the Good Samaritan that we looked at last week, and maybe you read it and missed the point. Maybe you left thinking, okay, I'll just do that. I'll be a good neighbor, I'll serve others, and I'm good. The author wants to be clear. Acts of service in the name of the Lord are no satisfactory substitute for knowing the Lord. You cannot meal train your way into the kingdom. Luke includes this story here because you will have to make a choice between things. And he's been building this whole section of narrative around contrasting things where one is the better portion. The cost of discipleship is better than putting your hand to the plow only to look back. It's better to receive the gospel than to reject it. It's better to rejoice that your names are written in heaven than that the spirits submit to you. It's better to ask, who can I make my neighbor, instead of asking, who am I obligated to treat as a neighbor? And it's better to hang on every word of the Lord than to be distracted by many tasks, even distracted by good ones. Because he's the better portion. The one thing that's necessary is to know and be with him. If you have not yet followed Christ in faith and baptism, if you're here and you're curious and you're investigating things, you might be coming in asking the same question that many people in the New Testament ask when they come near to Jesus, which is, what do I need to do? You want a list of things that you can check off. You want something that you can busy yourself with to kind of appease the lingering doubt, to give you some kind of tangible evidence to be able to point to and say, yeah, sure, I've messed up, but look at all these things that I've done. Look at all of these boxes that I've checked. Look at this list that I've kept. Certainly my ledger by now needs to be kind of out of the red. That isn't how this works. You won't find that here. Sin is an infinite offense. An infinite price has to be paid for your sin. There's nothing you can do to fix that. There's no list that you can check off. There's nothing that you can go do. But what we have for you instead is a much easier, and yet I would imagine a much more terrifying proposition for you. Not a list of things that you can do to get straight, but an invitation to come sit at the feet of Jesus and become a new creation. It requires much less of you, except for vulnerability. Because this has actually been the design all along, relationship with the Lord. That is why the portion that Mary has chosen is so much better, because it's actually what all of life has always been about. It's been about the creation intimately knowing its creator. God's design was to walk with his people in the garden. We see that in Genesis. God comes, as was his habit, to walk with Adam and Eve in the creation, in fellowship together. The idea that God is all about just kind of like assigning lists and tasks and rules is just a far cry from what we find in Genesis. Do you know what the first command that God gave is? I think most people would immediately kind of think of the instructions about what fruit to eat or not eat. That's not the first command. The first command is to be fruitful and multiply, to go out into the earth and subdue it. The first command that the Lord gave was make babies and travel. And then when you get there, exercise some measure of control and organization over what you find. I don't know many people who aren't into those things. The first tasks that God gave could hardly be described as burdensome. He says, enjoy marital intimacy and go see the world and be in charge of things. And I will walk with you and talk with you and be with you while you do. And we say, how oppressive. God created a rich relational life for his people. That's what was lost in the fall. That's what sin corrupted. Your sin has brought a whole host of consequences, but by far the most significant is loss of intimate relationship with your Maker. And if that's what was lost in the fall, it means that that's what Jesus reclaims by the cross and the resurrection. When Jesus goes to the cross in your place, when Jesus steps out of the grave that should have held you fast forever, he provides a means by which you can be justified, yes. A means by which you can be acquitted, a place where your guilt can be taken away and you can be declared innocent. But even more profoundly than being guilty sinners made innocent, at the cross, we are an alienated people reunited. Why does God hate divorce? It's literally the thing that sin did to his creation. The cross is where, because of Jesus, two irreconcilable parties meet and are reconciled. Two unrestorable parties meet and are restored. The gospel is about relationship with God restored. It's about a path made again, made once more back to sit at the Lord's feet. When you neglect that to instead busy yourselves with tasks, when you neglect that relationship to instead busy yourselves with tasks, you neglect what Jesus gave his life to obtain. Beloved, we think that an important part of what it means to be a member of the church is to serve. We expect every member of the church to be on at least one of our serve teams here. It's a huge part of discipleship. It is part of our discipleship track to invite the curious to become and belong and to equip them to serve and to multiply. Serving is a very good thing. But you cannot serve the church at the exclusion of walking with Jesus. It will not suffice as a gospel substitute. If you show up on Sundays that you're scheduled to serve, but you spend most other Sundays doing other things, that's not a good recipe for your soul. If you struggle to sit and listen to this sermon because you keep kind of looking around, seeing if anything needs to be done. If right now you feel kind of the burden that you kind of want to duck out of here and see if the Keurig needs to get filled or the trash needs to get emptied. For the love of all that we hold dear, please just sit down. I promise you that all of those things will still be there when we're done. This is the word of God. The one who created the universe. The one who formed you from the dust of the ground. Who breathed life into your lungs. Who hung the stars in the sky and flung the furthest galaxies with a flick of his wrist. He wants to make himself known to you. He's sitting with you. And not only that, he laid down his very life. He died a bloody death. He was beaten and mocked and scorned. Why? To purchase your attendance here. Your sin disqualified you from his presence, and he wanted you to sit at his feet. And so he died to bring you back here, to make you able once again to sit at his feet and hang on his every word. And you're thinking about what's for dinner. Forget the distractions. Hang on his every word. If you find yourself with your spouse or your kids or with other brothers and sisters, and it's difficult for you to sit still and spend time delighting in Jesus, enjoying the fellowship that he brings, because kind of running through your mind is a list of all the things that need to get done, even good, worthwhile things. you have to stop and learn to smell the gospel roses. God bless your productivity. God bless your hard work. God bless your service. This isn't about cutting back on how much you do for God because you just need to relax and take some me time. I'd argue that most of us probably need to pour ourselves out in service more than we do. But you can't be doing at the expense of dwelling. When faced with a choice to either know and spend time with Christ and anything else, there's one thing that's necessary. Choose the better portion. I want you this week to set aside uninterrupted, intentional, unhurried time to read the word and pray. This week. If you're like, I don't even know how that's possible. I want you to enlist a bodyguard. I want you to pick look around. I want you to pick someone else in this room. And I want you to find a time this week. And I want you to say, I'm going into that room with this Bible. Here's my phone. Stand guard at the door and don't let anything in or out for the next hour. And when someone enlists you as their bodyguard, I want you to rejoice in the time that your brother or sister spends in the word and in prayer. Not begrudging it to them because there's lots of other things that you could be doing right now. And frankly, you can think of a list of things that they could be doing with this time as well. I want you to rejoice in the time that your brother and sister spends in the word and in prayer and sitting at the Lord's feet. When you're doing the dishes, I want you to look in the other room and see your housemate reading their Bible. And then I want you to keep scrubbing and rinsing with a smile on your face and joy in your heart, thanking God that he's our better portion. When you're cooking dinner, I want you to listen to your spouse praying in the other room with the kids. And then I want you to chop and saute like it's a privilege to do so. Filled to the brim with gratitude that the one necessary thing is being attended to. Not thinking how they can do that at another time, and what really needs to happen right now is I need a little bit of help. Choose the better portion this week and rejoice when your sister chooses it too.